Hello and welcome back to Barter Radio. Just before I get started again, last episode I mentioned that on the 25th I was doing a talk with a gentleman called Scott Parker, who was the creative director for Ministry of Sound for about nearly a decade. We've done a podcast together before, it's very good, go listen to it. But we're now not doing that as a live event and we're just recording it instead and then pulling it out, so we were just worried that there wouldn't be enough people to sort of tune in live as we were doing it, so we just switched it to kind of a recorded thing. I'm going to edit it and put it out on YouTube at some point, probably next week, but I probably shouldn't say a date just in case I don't put it out then, but we'll see. I'm going to record it with him live, just me and him, and then I'll just edit it and put it out, and it'll be kind of a new visual thing that you can watch instead of listening to, so hopefully that should be alright. But yeah, in this episode, I speak to a gentleman called Tom Shaughnessy, who is one of the founders and a creative director at an agency based in Manchester called Glorious Creative. As ever, we talk about kind of his early influences and what got him interested into design to begin with. We discuss his time sort of in education and things. We touch on founding Glorious in, I believe, the early 2000s. And how that came about and things. And we touch on what makes Glorious glorious. Has started to become kind of a theme now, jumping on from kind of the last episode with Abbas from Alphabet. Yeah, and I hope you enjoy. For the people listening who aren't familiar with yourself, could you give them a bit of a rundown as to who you are and what you do?
Okay. So I'm Tom Shaughnessy. I'm a graphic designer. I am co-founder and design director of Glorious Creative in Manchester. Yeah, we've been here working in Manchester for about 20 odd years. Well, just as Glorious, 22 years, and then me personally before that since the late 80s. So yeah, it's been a while.
No, that's class, yeah. So, yeah, going back before all of that, can you remember where sort of your first, originally, like, what got you into design to begin with, basically?
Right. Okay. So I've listened to a few of your podcasts now, and everybody pretty much says the same answer, don't they? You start off in life, drawing, can't do anything else. Crap at school, the general stuff, but a passion, for drawing and art. I think for me, there's always been a sort of a love for typography that's been in there, So, I remember getting like a calligraphy set off me gran, when I was, I don't know, 7 or 8 or something like that. I'm really fascinated by, these sort of black letter typographic forms, which was really interesting. And then it's always, I think for me, it's always been sort of ingrained in my life, so everything that I've ever been interested in, so everyone talks about drawing logos and drawing record covers and things like that. For me, it was like drawing sports brand logos. So in the sort of late 80s, mid 80s, late 80s at school, everyone was into, Fila and Lacoste. And it was about badges, in my school and where we grew up, it was about badges. So Fila, La Sergio Ticina, Lacoste, Alessi, all them sort of brands. And it was very much about the logo, so I used to draw them, that F on a Fila logo, I was fascinated by that big chunky F with that separated top bar, so things like that I've always, and then into graffiti and, tagging and drawing sort of wild style letters and things like that. So again, it's always been there. So that's always been part of what I've enjoyed. Yeah. So that's something, my first sort of interests in it. That's where it all sort of started.
You mentioned getting a calligraphy set off your nan. Did your nan do calligraphy, or is it just kind of a coincidence type thing?
No, I imagine it was one of them things you just picked up at the market. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, Tommy likes drawing. I'll get him this. So I had no idea what it was. I didn't know, never heard of it, but yeah, I did it for years as well. And then I remember somebody gave me a calligraphy book. Do you know what I mean? And I remember tracing out letters, in ink and for days on end until the ink ran out. And then never filled up a pen again. Um, so yeah, that's what I've always been into. Yeah, typography really. Typography is the thing that sort of starts with everything. So even I used to draw posters. So I used to draw posters for the guy who lived down the street, and you could draw. So he said, "Could you do as a poster for the golf club?" And it was like a golf club in Flixton. And I remember trying to. My mum and dad I remember seeing Cooper Black for the first time on a bottle of cider that was in my mum and dad's, kitchen or something, and then just trying to draw the rest of the alphabet from CIDER. But things like that. So it's always been about sort of drawing letters, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Did you study art and design at sort of uni, college, anything like that?
I did a bit of an OND. I did sort of half an OND course. So my sort of way in, I guess, was I did a YTS. So I left school at 15, just after you've done all your exams and stuff. And then the options available to me really to go on a sort of a art foundation course, I guess, like do an art course or see if I could find a job. And I wrote a load of letters and sent them out to people, and then I ended up getting there's a place in Manchester, in Sale in Manchester, and there was a sign writers and poster writers. So again, it was like this sort of typography sort of base, and I ended up getting a YTS there. So this was a tiny little shop. It was one bloke who worked on his own, and he'd basically for years and years was a sign writer. So it was ink, brushes, sticks that you rest on, and you draw letters out. And he'd started off, in back in the day when they used to, do the sides of trucks or shop faces and things like that by hand, and paint massive big letters on the sides of trucks. So I worked with him. He had a screen printers in the bottom of his shop. He would sort of make these posters, and I'd sort of screen print them for him. And I would in the downtimes of no screen printing, I would try and learn how to, draw letters basically. So that was another sort of element. And then what happened for me was that you had to, when you was on a YTS, you had to go to college one day a week. I went to college one day a week, and they put me on some course. It was like technical drawing tracing at first, which was, God knows what that was about. And then they moved me onto a graphic design course. And I'd never heard of it, didn't know what it was, And I remember turning up the first day, and there was a load of kids there who were doing graphic design jobs, I guess, more graphic design jobs, and they were there on day release as well, like me on a YTS. And someone saying to me, right, you've got to design a letterhead. I had no idea what a letterhead was. I've never even heard the words before. But that was my first sort of, the first time I'd ever heard the expression or the phrase graphic design. Nobody said anything about it at school or anything like that. So that was like, well, this is different. And it was a similar sort of setup, I guess. You had to do a bit of life drawing. You're doing bits of collage. You were talking, the first time I heard the term Helvetica was, in that on that course. And so I did that while I was on my YTS. And then what happened for me is that what the guy who ran the course took me to one side one day and said, look, you've got a bit of an aptitude for this. You should maybe consider leaving your YTS and coming just to do the course full time. So I did. So I spoke to my dad, like, what you reckon? Like you do, at 15, 16. And he said, yeah, go for it. So I did. And it was like a little, and it's funny, John Macklin, who you spoke to, um, was on the same course. He was a year above me. So I've known John since 1988 or whatever it is, which is fun. And the first shitty job that he talked about, I actually worked at the same place with him for about, I don't know, a year maybe or something. So he went on to brighter things, and I went somewhere else, but he went on to brighter things. But so yeah, I've known John for years, which was quite mad, went on the course full time. And as John said, really, there was a guy who ran the course who was, who was banging to his max. He was like an early adopter. So we're on this course, and we've got Mac Pluses, which are the, I don't know if you've ever seen a Mac Plus. It's the little grey box with a screen about 10 inches, tiny little thing. And so we got to, understand and learn Macs, and software, and Mac Paint, Mac Word, and that in itself, was they quickly sort of developed into bigger and better Macs, so Mac 2s and Mac FX, I think, was the one of them was called. And then sort of Illustrator and PageMaker and software like that, they were sort of introduced. So I quite liked it. I got into it, and I think that sort of worked for me. We learned about typography. The other guy in the course was an old sort of design head, probably more commercial artist sort of type. Was a really good typographer. Was an illustrator as well. Was a designer from the probably 60s and 70s. So it was quite a sort of a broad education, really, from someone not knowing anything at all, never even heard of graphic design, to actually, starting to learn it, and just being introduced to the whole, everything.
It sounds like you've got kind of a nice mixture of, say, going down kind of the calligraphy route and then jumping on the computer bandwagon, where you've got kind of both sides of the coin. Whereas nowadays you get very digital, don't you? Especially in, I think, education, it's very kind of one-sided, and you don't get, a lot of courses, you don't do letterpressing or, everything
Mm.
like that.
Yeah, we was lucky in that respect, actually, because we went to, there was another college on the side. I'm not, it's a bit further down the road, but they did letterpress there, so we went down and learned about that. It was very much, you were very much encouraged, just because of the Derek, who was the older guy, and Nick, who was the younger guy. So Nick was, computers, Macs, and Derek was craft. That you're encouraged to get the paints out, and what was quite nice is that some of the projects that we did, so one of them was like, Shakespeare plays, and the titles of Shakespeare plays in different sort of typographic approaches. And then so you might start off something more calligraphic, and then move into how you might be able to, say, redraw that in Illustrator, and then adapt it and change it, and stuff like that. So taking it from, hand and craft skills, and then onto the computer and seeing what you could do with that. In those early days as well, it was tricky. The computers were slow, but it was at the infancy of it all, really. So yeah, it was good. It was happy times, really.
I completely forgot you'd watched the other ones. I think you're the first person I've had one that's listened to the ones that I've done before. I was like,
Yeah, I listened to a couple. Yeah,
you know what I'm talking about, and you know where I'm going with everything.
yeah. And it's like I said, it's interesting. I know some of the people. So I know Grant. I've known Grant for years. Grant works for us for a spell. Um, John Macklin, I've known for donkey's years, but I haven't seen him for donkey's years either. No Trevor, no Steve. So the people are in and around Manchester. I suppose when you're there that long, that you meet different people along the way.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. Yeah. At what point did you work at the Chase at one point as well? Is that
Yeah, yeah,
correct?
yeah, yeah. So what happened for me? So I was looking at your questions.
Sorry, I know this is just going off sideways, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's cool. It's cool, but I'm probably doing it. Um, But it's cool because what happened for me is, and when because one of your questions there about when your first sort of time in an agency, mine was mad. Mine was mad because what you had to go on a work experience from this YTS from the BTEC course, and I went to McCann Erickson Manchester, which I don't know if you know anything about it, but McCann Erickson Manchester is based in a place called Bonnis Hall, which is in Prestbury, and it's basically it's an old mansion, country home in the middle of Prestbury that was converted into an advertising agency. I don't know, in the 70s or something. So, so my placement was at Bonnis Hall. I mean, this other kid came from the course, and it's basically it was an 80s advertising agency. So you went through up the path, the big path, and you landed at this massive mansion. It had a swimming pool, it had a bistro. You went in through the front doors, and it had banks of walls of TVs playing all their adverts and stuff like that. It was all marble floors, and it's a grand, house in the middle in the country. So I did 2 weeks there. So my first experience of going on a placement somewhere was this crazy 80s advertising sort of landscape, which was mental. Yeah, that was yeah. And I hated it, to be honest. It was horrible. Um, I was too shy, I think. I was too young, too shy, too many posh people. Um, yeah, so I didn't really like it. But what happened is they offered me a job. And I took it, and I probably stayed about 6 months. And I worked there sort of in the Belfry. The whole advertising agency had one Mac, and they had nobody who knew how to use it. So I was sat in the tiny little office in the Belfry, it was called, which was the bell tower of the hall, and with a couple of Macs in there, and we were just doing bits of work and stuff. It'd be about 1988, I guess. So from there, went to work somewhere in Manchester, little agency, the same place as John Macklin. Then got offered another job somewhere else. And what had happened is by that point, sort of design had gone by the wayside, and we were Mac people, so we were doing production, we were doing typography, we were doing artwork and things like that for the people generally. The place where John was, that was more design. The next place I went after that was more production. And then at that point, I think I was getting a bit sort of, it's a bit more frustrating. I wanted to do the design, I wanted to be more creative, basically. So I had the Mac skills down, and I knew what I was doing. And because it was in its infancy, I was sort of, it's quite easy for me to move around Manchester at that point. And then there was a place in Manchester which had a reputation for great typography, and it was called Typographics 3. And they used to do all the production for the Chase. So I saw they advertised, and they had their beautifully set, beautifully designed little advert in the Manchester Evening News, looking for typesetters, creative typesetters, I think you used to call them. So I applied for it and didn't get it, and I was gutted. I didn't get it. And then about 2 weeks later, they called me back and said, actually, this job's available again if you're still interested. So I was, and I left where I was and went to work for them. So at this point, I'm about 20, 21, something like that. And that was my in into, the big time of Manchester, designer artery. It was, I was doing all the chases, typesetting. I was learning all about properly typesetting and typography. The guys at Typographics 3 were amazing. The typographers there had spent lifetimes studying typography um, and producing it properly. And so I got a 6 month sort of grounding with them, and then moved into the Chase's offices in town. And that was about 91 when I moved in. So that's when it started. So about 1991, I moved from Trafford Park, or Salford Quays, it was actually the dockhouse. And then we moved into town. So I was back in town again. I've been in town when I was younger, out of town, Old Trafford and places like that, and then back in town. So yeah, so it got into the Chase's offices in about 1991.
So you founded Glorious, co-founded Glorious in 2002. Could you touch on maybe what sort of spurred you on to pivot into starting your own practice at all?
Yeah, so we'd I'd been by this time we'd worked at the Chase for 6 years, about 6 years, doing all their typography, typesetting, artwork, things like that. And and working with like Ben Casey, who runs the Chase, and Lionel Hatch at the time. And just seeing the work that them guys producing sort of inspires you. I became sort of quite a frustrated sort of designer, I guess. But when you're surrounded by all that, greatness, it sort of rubs off on you, really, I guess. And then I went abroad for a year and worked abroad. I worked in Singapore for a year, and I think that's when it sort of changed for me. Is like I was working with senior designers and things like that, and then because I didn't know anyone, I was quite happy to put ideas forward and things like that, and some of them started to get picked up. And I think that's what gave me the confidence, I guess, to come back to England. And I remember I phoned Ben when I was in Bali or somewhere like that, and phoned him up and said I'd be back, because it's when I'd left. He said if you want a job when you come back, let us know. So I phoned him and said, I'll be back in a month. Can I come and see you, about some work? And he sort of said, yeah, yeah, it's fine, yeah, yeah. So I went back and I sort of said, this time I'd like to be part of a design team. Um, and he put me in a design team, and I worked, I sort of give it my best shot basically, for sort of got into it, did all right. And then in 1999, um, my business partner now, Mark Ross, came, and we worked together at the Chase. He'd been there a few times over the years, and he basically came to me and said, somewhere he'd worked previously in Edinburgh, they were looking to open an office in Manchester, a graphic partners they were called. They wanted to open a Manchester office. Would I be up for doing it with him? And that's how it started. I just said, yeah, cool, okay, let's do it. Didn't really think about it too much. And we handed our notice in just at the end of 1999. We left the Chase together, the pair of us, and set up Graphic Partners, for the Edinburgh-based company. Set them up in Manchester. Set the first studio there. So it was an opportunity, really. We got offered. Mark was offered an opportunity to set up an agency. He didn't want to do it on his own, and asked me to get involved. And it was like, yeah, okay, why not? And we dived in, and so that's how it started. Yeah,
Would you have sort of, I guess if you're a sort of offshoot from a different agency, you might have some of the things, if you just started from sort of a fresh, you might have different things that you'd have. But would you have any advice from someone just sort of
yeah.
asking, when you're setting up your own practice, would you have any advice for someone?
I think what's really important is that which I didn't do, is probably include your nearest and dearest, in the decision making process. I sort of jumped. I didn't really think about it because it was just a great opportunity, and it sort of it triggered a few different sort of reactions from a girl that I was seeing at the time. Just that ended that, and she wanted to go traveling and stuff. I'd done that already, so I was sort of quite keen. And I think if you're setting up on your own, there's you've got to be prepared. It's going to be pretty difficult. You're going to have to probably work really hard for quite some time. There's going to be times when you can't pay yourself. There's going to be times when it's really tough. You know, um, I think it's really important to have a good idea of where the work is coming from. In my experience, if work's coming through the door, everything's great. You know, everything's good. When it's not coming through the door, then it's like, shit, what do we do now? And then, you have to do stuff and you put plans in place and you go for it. And that's what we've done that. We've been through a few different time. We've been going 20 odd years. So, there's been times when you've had to make some tough decisions. There's been times where you've, done some daft things, you know, all kinds of stuff. But you don't have anyone telling you what to do, and you're in charge of your own destiny. And for me, as a moderately sort of new designer, when we started, I was sort of in at the deep end. I worked with Mark, and Mark's a great designer and was a team leader at the Chase. And he's a top bloke and everybody wanted to work with him and stuff. So it was a great opportunity for me. Um, but it was very much, in at the deep end, and there was a steep learning curve. And I think, I mean, I can't speak for Mark, but I think for both of us, having somebody else to work with, if you've got a partner, it's going to make life easier. I think you get to bounce off, ideas off each other, a problem shared and all that, So I'd say advice is that, prepared to work hard, prepared to make some tough decisions. If you can find a partner to do it with, I think, that would be great. I think if you can find a partner who do something slightly different to you, our roles at Glorious over the years have sort of changed slightly as Mark's gone more sort of managerial, and he's very much involved in the strategic part of the business and things like that. Whereas I picked up more with the studio, and I love being hands-on. I like designing. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to carry on, lead the team, work on projects day in, day out, and I'm still doing that, 30 years into me working career, so yeah, definitely just, prepared to work hard is a big one, definitely.
You still get kind of, I, I don't, I guess the buzz kind of when you first get into it, it's kind of like, oh, I'm doing all this mental stuff and that, I'm doing all this stuff for clients, whatever. You just still kind of, does it spur you on kind of thing, being 30 years in?
Yeah. I suppose that's something else, that you've got to love it. You've got to have a passion for it. And as time goes on, you might, decide that you don't want to do certain parts of the business or anymore. So some people don't like being on the tools anymore. Mark's not bothered about that. He likes to write and stuff these days. I love being on the tools. I love getting into my pad. I love getting a new brief. And you still have that mindset really that this could be the best thing that you've ever done. And I think if you're not thinking like that when you start a new project, then something's not right somewhere, in my view. Do you know what I mean? So the excitement is very much still there for me. Yeah.
So yeah, this is kind of the midpoint of the show where I ask everyone the same thing, and it's called the Hall of Fame. And it's just the idea that if you could name sort of one thing that's been sort of the real heartbeat of what you've done in your career thus far, be it a person, piece of music, piece of design, movie, whatever. What do you think that would be for yourself?
I had to think about this. there's loads of stuff, obviously. There's loads of influences, there's loads of designers, there's loads of, directions of in that Swiss typography for me is always, Muller Brockman and all that sort of stuff has always been an influence. But I think the driving force for me has been fear. It is the thing that keeps me going, It's the all kinds of things, the fear of missing out on something for a start, the fear of not being as good as you should be, the fear of being told that whatever it is that you're putting forward aren't creative enough, you know. All them sort of things is what's driven me along the way, So the fear of um yeah, generally not being good enough or not, not well, all kinds of stuff. When you're designing things, and when you're working on projects and say you commission a photographer and you're working with that photographer, the fear of wasting that photographer's time, it's a constant driving force for me, is all different kinds of fear.
Mm. Well, that's a good one. That's a good one. I did a bloke there's an agency in London called Koto where I did one with James Greenfield. It runs out a few ago, and he said fun. So now I've had fun and then fear within like 5 episodes, which is quite
Yeah,
interesting. Which is
yeah.
probably designed to be fair. If you want to break it down, it's being shit scared and then
Yeah,
doing some shit which is cool, isn't it? So
yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, fun's super important.
yeah.
I mean, blimey. I mean, I did the 90s, and I was working at the Chase throughout the night from 91 to about 90, well, 99. So I went away for a year, but I also, the most of the time was working, and we had some big fun through the 90s, I made some friends for life who I still see now, So fun's super important. You've got to enjoy it. That is mega, it's super important. But like I say, for me personally, you know, fear's been fear's been the driving force, I think.
No, I think that's good. I think if you're not scared, you're probably not doing some. I think being content is probably a big thing, isn't it? And then it's just kind of pushing
Yeah,
you. I think if you're scared, you're kind of pushing yourself on you, kind of thing.
yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, on Glorious's website, you've got a story about four bakers when you open up the website. Could you touch on where that comes from, so the origins of it?
That basically came from a guy who worked for us. He was a copywriter, old ad man. He was doing business development and strategy and things like that. He worked for us for a few years. And one of the previous iterations of the website, the redesign, we wanted to do something that set our stall out, but in a slightly different way. So, the obvious thing to do is to, do a show reel of your work, on your website. And like I said, we wanted to do something different. So Jeff it was a guy who had basically had heard this story on the radio like years before. And we were talking about different things, and this some memory had triggered this story. And he then searched it and tried to find it, online, and couldn't find it. So rewrote it from his own memory, really. But you know, it's got shorter over the years and more succinct. But we just liked it. We liked this idea of just thinking differently. It's that sort of things don't have to be big, to be clever sort of approach, isn't it? If someone saying I'm the best baker in the world, and then someone just being clever and say, well, actually, best baker in the street, and it's a nice little twist, and hopefully it sort of sets your stall out for hopefully the experience of working with you for potential clients, so yeah, it was a so we've had it since, and we're redoing our website at the moment, and we think we're going to keep it.
I haven't done this one before, and I know I sent the questions to you yesterday, so I don't know if it shit you up a bit, but um, if you had to define what makes glorious creative glorious in sort of maximum 5 words, what do you think those would be?
I mean, well, it is a tough question. What I did was actually, I thought when I was thinking about it, I was thinking, well, we've got 5 values, and that we speak to clients about, but one of them is being creative, so it's sort of, but I think for us, it's about passion. It's you've got to love what you're doing. First and foremost, curiosity is trying to get to the nub of what the problem is, and doing that research up front and spending that time doing that. We our process that we go through is all about, and it's no different to a lot of other people's, but it's about that research and fact finding and section up front that's really important, that everything stems from that. You're trying to find that little sort of nugget that's going to be the core idea. Then it's about the research. It's about speaking to all the right people in the with the client, all the right stakeholders, to give yourself the best chance of making something that's right for the client, but that's not as obvious or immediately sort of what you might expect. So I think, curiosity, passion, process, the team has got to be right. The people that you've got working with you is super important. And just, time and space, I guess, to actually take a step back, you know, edit, it's them sort of things, being able to pick. And that's why we work in the studio, because we've got space. We can put things on the wall. We can take a step back. We can go away for a day or two and come back and look at it again. And so that time and space to sort of think is really important as well.
I think we touched on this a little bit, but could you touch on sort of how the industry has changed during the course of your sort of career a little bit from when you first started to maybe how it looks now, or maybe even how, a project, maybe how you approach projects maybe have changed during the course of that.
I'd say, well, obviously, in numerous different ways it's changed. The things that sort of spring to my mind is strategy is a lot bigger and more important than it was when we started. Like when we got a brief at the Chase and all those years ago, it was a written brief from the client. There wasn't a sort of a strategic element to it. It was usually a decent brief from a marketing department that you basically ran with. You questioned it possibly, um, but essentially that was it. You got the briefing, you got on with it. So this whole sort of strategic part of the design industry is something that's developed and grown massively over the years. And at first I was a little bit, well, what's the matter with a decent brief? Why do you need all this bollocks? But obviously as you get older and you work with decent strategists and things more, it it really helps with the creative output, and it helps get to a better solution, I think, for the businesses that you work with. So that's a big one. Time is another one. The amount of time you get to spend on projects is nothing like it was. And for us, someone coming from way back is the lack of print. We used to love making stuff. The amount of print that we do, well, we don't do any. Basically, we don't do any anymore. And if it is, it's a few business card for someone or a little, little brochure or something. Nobody does. Well, no one we work with anyway. And it's few and far between. Prints anything anymore, which is a massive shame, because there was nothing better than getting a printed piece back from the production house. That was the best part of the job. Picking papers, matching Pantone colors, picking processes, having that bit of budget to include a bit of foil or embossing or something like that on a project, looking for different materials that you could print on, I've got a drawer full of business cards, that from time where people were printing on all kinds of stuff, bits of perspex screen printed or, embossed fold out things and, all kinds of mad shit. It was a lot more fun when print was involved, for an old bloke like me, definitely.
Do you think that funness in sort of the craft has almost gone to the wayside a bit, and it's always been a bit lost in kind of the digitization of everything?
Yeah, I do actually. There's nothing. I mean, maybe, yeah. I mean, it sounds dead corny, but the smell of ink and stuff like that. Screen printed posters, were, a beautiful thing on a nice bit of stock, finding, different, the paper suppliers were around every other month with different stuff that you could work with, Bible paper, things like that, which was just like, how does that hold ink? It was mad, different kinds of closures for brochures, interscrews or folding techniques and things like that. It was, and I guess, designers these days who are more sort of embedded into the digital world will argue that there's loads of fascinating, interesting stuff, and I'm sure there is, and when we get the opportunity, we try and work with, animators and great digital people, to make things move, I guess is the modern day equivalent, stuff that moves. So yeah, I do mourn it a little bit, I do, designing books and things like that, and that was happy days, happy times for me and Mark, I would say, definitely.
So yeah, beginning to sort of round off, I assume during your tenure you've kind of looked at a load of different student portfolios, graduate portfolios. Do you have anything that you personally look for in kind of a body of work, or maybe even the person as well?
Um, well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting because again, then people would send stuff, and that was always sort of quite interesting. I remember one time a guy came into the Chase, young lad student came in with his CV printed on a t-shirt. He walked into reception, took his t-shirt off, left it with the receptionist and walked out, and it was like a little bit of theatre. So you remember things like that, now and again, you get things people send you, which is always sort of quite interesting. But anything that's coming digitally, um, I would say something's for me. Something's got to catch my eye. If I'm going to flick, I mean, there's the classics. Make sure you spell something right. Don't just send it to their colleague or to whom it may concern, because it just pisses people off. It's like, well, if you can't be asked to find out who you meant to be sending it to, you know, then don't even bother. Might sound a bit harsh, do you know what I mean? Saying that, I'll always look, because that's just inquisitiveness. Um, so if I'm looking through a PDF or a website, so I just want something to catch my eye in the first place, a typographic sort of approach, or a nice color scheme, or just a nice visual. Generally, something catches my eye, then you sort of dive in a little bit deeper. Do you know what I mean? It's like then you're looking for the core idea. It's like what's the idea? What was the brief? If the general feel of the book in the first instance is nice and sort of inviting, then I'll go a bit deeper. I'll look for what the ideas were, and a lot of the time it's easy now to be distracted by fancy mock-ups and things like that. So you have to work a little bit harder now, I think, because the fancy mock-ups, you're like, oh, that looks great. And then you're looking at it, it's like, don't can mean anything. I don't get it. It's a load of nonsense, So So I have to work a little harder now with portfolios just because of fancy mock-ups, but yeah, just a decent CV, nicely laid out, the usual stuff really. Take just some care and attention. It's your shop window, isn't it? It's your shop window. You get one chance to impress. Don't fuck it up, is the general sort of terminology. Work at it, work at it.
No, that's quality, yeah. And then super lastly, it's cliche as fuck, but if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, what would you give yourself?
Probably don't be so scared. You know, do you know what I mean? Don't be, I should have gone to university, I think, but I was a bit scared. I mean, you end up on your own path, don't you? But I'd say, be a bit, to me, be a bit braver.
And then super lastly, do you have anywhere people can find yourself, or I guess the studio as well online?
Yeah, it's gloriouscreative.co.uk. Um, and my Instagram, which doesn't have any work on it actually, it's just a load of daft pictures really. Um, is just Tom Shaughnessy, Tom.Shaughnessy or something like that. Yeah. But they did the website, yeah, is probably the best place to see any work.
No, sound as a pound. Let me just bang start recording.